Okay, let's go. This is going to be a fascinating hour, and I'm truly honored to have this gentleman as a guest, and I hope all of you will learn, as I'm looking forward to doing, new things about very interesting subjects. Let me just leave it at that while I do the introduction here. The guest, of course, is, if you've looked at guests at Rense.com, Dr. Ken Johnston. Ken learned to fly in the U.S. Marine Corps, and in the 1960s, Ken was one of the 5 test pilots assigned to work with the astronauts during the Apollo Moon program at NASA in Houston. His job back then was to help train the astronauts to fly the lunar module. He was one of the test conductors and became the test director of the TM-5 lunar module spacecraft that was used to train all moon landing Apollo astronauts. All of them. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic. Let me do that again. I want to hit the word all. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. All of the data and photographic information. Okay? Ken has 3 Bachelor's of Science degrees in aviation and aerospace engineering. He has a doctorate in divinity and a PhD in metaphysics. In 2001, NASA and JPL selected Dr. Ken Johnston to represent them in New Mexico as one of their solar system ambassadors. Ken is no longer with NASA or JPL, but continues to give lectures throughout the United States. To wrap up an amazing career, Ken has now come forward to disclose what was really found on the backside of the moon. He's retired now, raises miniature horses and donkeys in New Mexico, has a big family to have fun with, and really, I hope, is enjoying life. Another man who has served this country brilliantly. Ken, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. There was a recent story, and one of the reasons you're on, most specifically, had to do with a story that, well, you had some issues with it. Let's put it that way. It was all over the internet about the second week of September. NASA whistleblower, alien moon cities exist, and I saw the story back then, and it went on, round and round, and pretty fanciful things in it, but I thought I'd invite you on, and thanks to Jay Widener for setting this up. And I guess we could kind of start wherever you'd like, but I certainly do want to spend some time on the issue of your being in charge of and responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. This is key information. All right, where would you like to start?
Well, I don't know. I guess we could start about in the beginning, particularly with this article where they were saying that, that I came out and said that there were alien cities, et cetera. A lot of that information was published by Richard C. Hoagland and Mike Barra in their book, Dark Mission. And, it's kind of interesting how the news, if you've been following it, which we all can't help from following it.
Right.
They have a tendency to kind of get a little tidbit, and then they start spinning it the way they want to see it.
Well, they grow it into a mountain, some of them. They take a little... It's amazing what they do. It's far beyond spin. I mean, they almost create an entire fiction.
That's what it winds up. And there's so much real truth and information out there that if they just stick to the basics and do proper journalism and research
right,
things,
right.
I think all the public would be well informed. As far as being in charge of all of the photographic data generated, this was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. All of the pictures that were taken during the missions to the moon, those that also went around the moon, it didn't land Apollo 10 and, of course, Apollo 13.
Okay, we're talking, excuse me, Ken, we're talking about all of the pictures taken en route to the moon, orbiting the moon, landing on the moon, leaving the moon, all of it went through your hands.
In addition, all of the photographic data that was generated at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory as the various scientists would come in from around the world and process some of the moon rocks, and then they would write up their particular reports as to what was found on the moon. And that kind of brings up an interesting story, Jeff. I was on a flight and talking with a person sitting next to me. We're talking a little bit about the Apollo program and the moon rocks, and this gentleman across the aisle. He says, could I interview you? I'm with the Arizona Herald. And the reason I bring that up is that in the conversation, we talked about some of the elements that are found in the moon rocks. We found that there was hydrogen, and we did find some oxygen. And I made the comment that if we were to set up a base, we could process that and we actually be able to create our own fuel for return flights and make it a little bit easier. Well, when the article came out, it said that Johnston said that they could land on the moon and fuel up their rockets. So,
just like pulling up to a gas pump. No problem at all.
No problem at all. No. But I helped generate the lunar sample information catalogs. Various scientists would take all of their writings, and if you know how doctors write, it's a little difficult. I had a whole typing pool of stenographers, and I would have to proofread and edit and put it into a document and create the lunar sample information catalog.
So you try to make it readable, is what you're saying.
Correct. And also would want to know where their particular rock came from on the lunar surface. So we had lunar surface pictures. We had the angles that it was, where it was cut. It was in the middle of this particular rock or on the sides. Mm-hmm. And then they would write up their particular reports on it like that. So these I would ship out all over the world with lunar samples. Now, we would have scientists that would come in, and they would want to have a picture and have a good, take a look and see what they were getting. And so that was quite an opportunity. Dr. Jeffrey Warner had been in charge of it for the first 2 flights to the moon, and he asked me to take over from him. And I got a few commendations of cleaning up the mess and getting it to where everybody could find what they needed.
Well, you were sitting literally at the nexus of some of the most amazing information in history. I mean, that must have been very exciting for you.
It has been, and looking back over it, sometimes I look at it and I say, did we really do all of this stuff? But fortunately, I was a pack rat, and I kept all the documents and records and information, and actually was able, we'll get into that a little bit, on the pictures that were taken.
Right. This is going to be very important and germane to the crux of our conversation here, which is we don't get the full story from NASA, which surprises absolutely nobody listening, but they do want to hear the details. Now, I'm not going to ask you to say yes or no, but I certainly hope you got a little piece of your own moon rock out of the deal somewhere along the line. I mean, how many pieces did they bring back? How many pounds altogether over the mission histories that we know about?
Since it's been well over 40-something years ago, so little details like that I've kind of let slip. I can dig it out for you, and on the program we can talk.
Well, you're certainly welcome to come back. Sure, I was going to say it had to be several hundred pounds. Yeah.
Hundreds of pounds, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you're in Houston.
Right.
The missions are underway. The telemetry is coming back. Photographs. Were they sending back live video to you as well?
We had both. We had live telemetry, photographic feed coming back. But primarily what I was interested in most were the Hasselblad cameras and the 16-millimeter sequence cameras. And,
right.
There's quite a story behind Apollo 14 and what was discovered on the backside of the moon on the command module and the 16-millimeter sequence cameras.
Okay.
If I could go into that a little bit.
Well, let's do that. Now, the backside of the moon is never seen by us folks here on the ground. Clementine, and I've forgotten the year now, but Clementine, the U.S. naval satellite that went up and literally mapped, I guess, the entire backside of the moon, and perhaps the entire moon, if I remember correctly. But anyway, Clementine did the whole thing, supposedly. Those pictures, all of them, have never been released to the public that I'm aware of. And it is said that the backside of the moon is a very interesting place. So tell us about Apollo 14.
All right. Apollo 14, as most people may recall, when we went to the moon, we had to separate the lunar module from the command module.
Sure.
The 2 astronauts that would to go on the lunar surface would descend in the lunar module and land on the surface and do their experiments down there. While they were on the surface, the command module pilot continued to go around and around and around the moon and had various experiments he had to do, as one of which was photographing the backside of the moon. Now, there was a director of the astronomy and department at the Manned Spacecraft Center at the time. It wasn't Johnson Space Center. Was Dr. Thornton Page, and very, very interesting gentleman. he contacted me and asked if I could get a hold of a specific reel of 16 millimeter film from the Apollo 14 mission.
All right. When was this? When was this, Ken? When did he ask you, approximately?
This was the astronauts. Let's see. This was Apollo 14, so we had stopped quarantining the astronauts.
Mm-hmm.
We had to quarantine Apollo 11.
I remember.
And Apollo 12 because there was concern about bringing back the
microbes,
contaminants.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was right within a week after we returned on Apollo 14.
So it was right after that, and you got a request again for 16 millimeter stop action.
Yeah, it's a 16 millimeter gun sequence camera. It's the same type of cameras that are used on the jet fighters and bombers whenever they go out and drop bombs and missions and things to show whether or not they destroy a target. So the camera itself can allow you to go frame by frame or sequence of frames. You can zoom in and zoom out.
Got it.
Since I was trained in that, Dr. Page asked me if I'd pull that. You had to have a top secret clearance to be able to get into the back of the photo laboratory at JSC. And so it was my privilege to go and pull that out and set up a private showing for Dr. Page and some of the other scientists, astronomers.
Now again, this is all back side of the moon. Okay.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, I set it up, and the guests were all there, and we're watching the pictures coming by, and then on this particular reel, and we're coming up on a crater which is called Tsiolkovsky. As you know, the Russians pretty well named most of the large craters on the backside of the moon, what we did. And Tsiolkovsky was very interesting. The sun angle was such that half of the crater was in shadow. The bottom of the crater was in shadow. And in that shadow area, there was a cluster of like 5 domes. So what I could describe would be like clear domes or opaque domes that were generating their own light in the shadow in this crater. And there was, it looked like a column of steam or something coming up from the central one. Dr. Page had me freeze the camera, stop, back and forth, go back and forth, zoom in close, and go back. And he turned to the other 7 scientists and says, "Well, boys, what do you think?" And they all started chuckling and laughing like it was an inside joke. And he asked me to go ahead, okay, finish the reel. Well, I did that, and then I had to take the film back into the photo laboratory. So as I'm taking the film in to the back, the canister that had the film in it, there was this light table. There were 3 people there, and there were 2 gentlemen and a young lady. And they had the negatives out, and they were painting on the negatives.
What?
And I asked them what. Yes.
Now, this hold on, please. This, first of all, this is a black and white film or color film?
Oh, both.
Okay. Now, they had the film. Was it on a reel left and a reel right? In other words, they were winding the film through some kind of a work area in the middle of the 2 reels, or did they have the film just laying on the table and were pulling the film off the reel?
Well, what they had done is they had enlargements, probably 8 by 10 inch enlargements, positive transparencies.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they were using those to become the master, and they were painting out, particularly along the horizon and areas on the lunar surface, and I asked them what they were doing, and one of the gentlemen says, "Well, we're professional strippers." The young lady, she kind of took offense to that. She said, "No, what we do is that we are stripping out, we are painting out the horizon on the moon because the stars would confuse people, and we don't want them to get confused with the little specks of light."
Oh, sure. Right.
And, well, I kind of took that as strange, went on in and checked that canister film in. And the next morning at 10 o'clock, I went and checked it back out again to give the showing at the main auditorium for, as I say, the rank and file at Johnson Center.
Knowing what was to be seen, and obviously looking forward to this because it's an astonishing thing, yeah.
I had the privilege of my older brother working there as well as my first cousin. Another interesting story here. But they were both present for this showing, and as we're getting close to it, I'm saying, okay, guys, you got to see what we found on the backside of the moon. We come up on Tsiolkovsky, and there's nothing in the shadow. There's nothing in the crater. And we go on across, and I stopped the camera, the film I'm showing, and I told the audience, I said, I'm having camera problems, just a moment. And I backed up. I took the film out. I looked to see if it had been cut or spliced, because, of course, I know how to do that stuff. And I could not find any evidence that it had been cut or spliced, which means in 24 hours, they'd taken that film, taken it out, airbrushed out those domes and lights, and refilmed it.
Made a new master.
Back in the
Yeah, they made a new master. I used to work with film. I understand exactly what you're saying. This is astonishing, and you must have been shocked and then enraged afterward. You had to have been.
Enraged, I don't think is the right word, because we were all so dedicated at getting to the moon and getting back before the Russians did, and they kept compartmentalized so much data and information that we would see something that was out of the ordinary, and I'll tell you of some others in a minute. It just didn't seem right, but we didn't have time to stop and check because we were pushing to keep up with the schedule. But I ran into Dr. Page that afternoon after I checked the film back in over at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and I said, Dr. Page, what happened to the lights and things on the backside of the moon and stuff we found there? He winked at me and he said, there was never anything there.
I would have been furious. I would have been felt betrayed. I would have felt like I had been used, duped, set up, and all kinds of things. You handled it very, very well. I guess you...
Dumbfounded, I think is probably a better word.
What's that?
I said I was dumbfounded.
Oh, yeah, that too. But come on. Well, you had seen things on there that, to me, literally change history as we know it. Period.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's been kept secret now on 45 some odd years.
So they've got the master film on the one that they made a new master. They put the original away for safekeeping. It's been obviously digitized and transferred many times since then. They have a warehouse full of the real deal about off-planet experiences, certainly probes we've sent out there, missions. So again, in this Tsiolkovsky, was it?
Tsiolkovsky's with it.
Tsiolkovsky. All right.
Tsiolkovsky crater.
Now, in that crater, in the dark shadow of the bottom of it, explain again what you saw clearly, please.
Okay, you have to understand the command module is circling the moon, probably not much more than 20 to 50 miles high because of the, and that I don't quote me on, but basically a fairly low orbit.
Understand.
And from there, you've got a pretty good view, and from the film I was looking at, it was pretty easy to see. Tsiolkovsky is not a major, big, huge crater, but it's a substantial medium size. And as I said, the sun angle was such that half of the bottom of the crater was in shadow, and that's where we saw. You could think of a dome, a semi-clear dome over living quarters or over a habitat, so that you had a living environment underneath these domes. And we've talked about building those on. The public has talked about building them on Mars as well as on. Correct.
All right, now, did the film show enough of these domes to be able to see anything through them? You said there was light emanating from them. Okay, we got that.
They were glowing, or illuminated from inside, is I guess the best way to say it.
Okay, so there's a power source there, right? Okay.
Right, and then the fact that there was a column of like steam, but it was due to the atmosphere on the moon was becoming diffused pretty quickly, but it was obvious that there was something venting from the central part of these 5 domes.
Were the 5 domes all of the same size? Did they vary in size? Were they laid out in any particular kind of alignment?
That's an interesting question. I've never really thought of that. I think it'd be better to say that they were positioned based upon the terrain area where they were clustered together.
Okay.
They would probably have been connecting tunnels either just below the lunar surface from one dome to the other.
Very sophisticated.
They were tightly clustered.
Very advanced, very sophisticated construction, obviously. Something very profound going on there. Earth-shaking. And when this guy winked at you and said that, you were dumbfounded. At some point, you had to, at that moment in your professional career, realize that the fix was in.
Well, that and, a lot of people talked about communication back from Apollo 11 on a closed frequency, closed channel. And we heard a lot of that going on while we were at the Johnson Space Center. But before we could really follow, most of them saying, that was just a ham operator that was hamming it up. And then as the years go by, and so that was the whole thing. Once we finished the moon program, for instance, the Grumman Aerospace Corporation I was with, they laid off 26,000 employees. So if you didn't have the data with you or couldn't keep them, that's the other thing. Once we got terminated, the FBI came and confiscated all of our manuals and books and references that we had.
The FBI? The FBI did it.
That's what we were told.
All right.
So I don't have any of the Apollo operations handbooks
Okay.
or the drawings or.
Well, I'm hearing in your voice all I need to hear, and I'm sure the listeners feel the same way. All right, so that's the backside of the moon on Apollo 14. Fascinating. You knew at that time that someone else was there. In the years, the decades that have elapsed since then, have you come to any decision as to whether it might have been ours or whose it might have been?
Well, that is a consideration as to whether or not it was one of our prior generations of the 5 cycles that the Mayan calendar and the Mayans and the others have talked about that the Earth has gone through. It could well have been, although we might get into a little bit more if we have time, it could well have been the Anunnaki. You want to look at it from that standpoint.
Well, and that was E.T. Okay. All right.
Correct.
Yeah. And obviously they put them on the backside of the moon to prevent observation from Earth telescopes, to make it a little tougher.
No, and on the front side as well.
Oh, okay, well, we're going there next. All right. Mm-hmm.
The front side, there were several shots from the Russian spacecrafts going to the moon before we did the manned missions.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually see on the rim of the Earth on the side parts of collapsed domes. Now, Mike Barra and Rich Holder have done a lot of research work showing that there is the existence of some of these ancient arcologies, both on the front side and the back side of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
There's evidence that at one time it was inhabited. Some of these arcologies have all collapsed, and you can see on the side of one of them where it looks like it's cracked and fallen in half of it. And there's evidence on the front. When you said on the back side, only no. If you're going to have a civilization that you're helping bring along and you want to observe them just like we put mice in a cage, you don't want to have a good observation point. Well, there's a crater on the front side of the moon, just about foresight, almost in the center of the moon, where you can see the evidence of trusses and supports that would have held a dome at one time. So,
well, the dome motif, obviously, at least at the time of Apollo 14, was still extant and functional, at least on the backside.
And my question that I came up with, was it ET or was it our black projects, black ops?
Well, we have, as Ken, most of our listeners understand the idea of a parallel, much advanced technology which has taken us a far afield in space. So it might well be something along those lines, even though it was in the
Absolutely.
1960s. Okay.
Absolutely. And with actually even the Hubble telescope, we tried to get NASA to focus Hubble on the moon.
Fat chance, huh?
And they said, we can't do that. It's too bright. It would damage Hubble.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Remember that? And then they turned around and they started photographing, and there's some, in this article on me, there's some pictures of Hubble actually photographing an absolutely perfect shaped pyramid on the surface of the moon. And then as well as, so that they can use Hubble. They could zero in really close and take a look at some of these areas. And the latest thing I just heard is that NASA's trying to declare a no-fly zone on the moon.
Well, they have. It takes effect, I believe, at the end of this month. They've declared a no-fly zone to protect heritage and archaeology of human visitation, something like that. Now, they've released a couple of photographs also, allegedly taken, of the surface of the moon where a couple or three of the Apollo missions landed. Now, the first one was a fairly high-resolution photograph that was released. I'm sure you may have seen it. Maybe you haven't, but it's out there on the net. It was very interesting because the bottom of the lander was still there, which it should be. There were numbers of trails of footprints all around the site, which should be. But there wasn't a single trail from the lunar rover of that mission, and that mission should have had a rover track map all over the place. It didn't.
If it was Apollo 15, 16, and 17, yes, they had rovers.
The last three had rovers. This, I believe it was, I can't remember. I was talking to Jay about this recently. He said, "What don't you see here?" And it might have been 17, but anyway. The second picture that was released, I think it was the second picture a couple of weeks ago, was taken at a much higher, or at least released from a perspective of a much higher altitude, and it was a very low resolution picture, so you could not zoom in on it, and it did not show the detail of the first one. So
they're famous about putting blurry pictures out.
Oh, they are just amazing at it. Yeah.
And any good geek would be able to put in a better bandage over or blacking out area.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these particularly on what we're looking at in the comets and asteroids and meteors right now we're tracking. I was given directions to destroy all of the photographic data I had except for one set. And as the director of the...
Destroy the originals, Ken?
No, the originals are kept in the photo lab back in bonded locked storage again.
Okay, so you were instructed to destroy the working copies of the originals.
And I had 5 complete sets that I maintained at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. I asked him, I said, well, this is we paid for these with our taxes. A lot of universities would love to have a set of these. He says, I don't care what you do, just get rid of them.